In this video, we'll be going over high CR monsters who are kind of weak for their high CR rating. And I'll be using a minimum CR of 15 for this video, going all the way up to the maximum of 30. And to start off this video, we'll go over a CR 22 monster, the Zaratan. This is a gargantuan elemental with only 2 intelligence, so it's really dumb and will try to single-mindedly kill whatever's in front of it. With its normal multi-attack action, it only deals around 54 damage on average, which isn't a lot. For comparison, the CR 15 Purple Worm deals around 83 damage on average with its multi-attack. That only hits 2 times. And the Purple Worm isn't even the highest damage dealing CR 15 creature, although it is pretty good at what it does. So I'll be kind of using it as a measuring stick for the rest of this video. Although even with dealing less damage than a CR 15 creature, it does make up for it with its legendary actions, where one of them is the ability to make an extra stomp attack. And if it uses the stomp 3 times, then its average damage jumps up all the way to 132, which definitely makes it the second highest average damage of all the monsters that will appear on this list, and kind of why it's only at the number 10 spot. Although this is assuming you use all of its legendary actions in order to stomp. This creature wasn't really intended to be used in this way. You see, it has a unique legendary action called Retract, which costs 2 of its actions to use, and causes the monster to retreat into its shell, giving it resistances to all damage, but also treating the creature as restrained. Now, resistance to all damage is nice, basically takes half damage. The restrained condition means that it can't move, has disadvantage on all of its attacks, and all attacks against it have advantage, so it really kind of cancels out the benefit that you receive. And the only reason to use Retract is in order to use its other 2 legendary actions, which can only be used if the creature is currently retracted. But both of those cost 2 actions to use as well. So with only having 3 legendary actions, you have to wait until your next turn in order to use either of them. One of them allows it to heal for around 50 hit points, and the other one allows it to use its Spit Rock ability, which it can use with one of its 2 legendary actions without having to use Retract. Spit Rock is just a ranged attack which hits for around 40 damage, and isn't half bad, I guess, but not more damage than just using Stomp with all 3 legendary actions. So its little gimmick of retreating into its shell is kind of bad, and you're better off just ignoring those features altogether. The creature also has Vulnerability, which is kind of rare for high CR creatures, where it takes double damage from thunder attacks. But it does have a neat bonus action, which basically allows it to destroy obstacles and create difficult terrain in a 120-foot radius. So this thing is deadly if you fight in the middle of a city, and not at all dangerous if you have the ability to fly, which a lot of high-level characters do have. Now, it does also have an AoE ability called Spew Debris, which doesn't hit very hard for a high-level AoE, but it does have a really wide radius of a 90-foot cube, so it is an option if you can hit the entire party with it. But it won't actually do more damage than its multi-attack unless it hits at least 2 or more targets. Now, another funny thing of note with this creature, despite the fact that it's a giant turtle, it actually has less health and AC than the Ancient Bronze Dragon, which is also a CR 22 creature. In fact, it has less health than all of the Ancient Dragons, and is being out in AC by half of them. Speaking of dragons, at number 9, we have the Ancient Red Dragon. This is a CR 24 creature, which deals around 126 damage on average during its turn, assuming you include its 3 legendary actions using its tail for maximum damage efficiency, which, funny enough, is slightly less damage than the Zaratan, but it does have significantly more health and 1 higher AC, as it has an impressive 550 health on average. Although, why is one of the hallmarks of Dungeons & Dragons on a list of worst high-level monsters? Well, because it doesn't really do much outside of its Fire Breath. Its Fire Breath is really good. It deals around 91 damage on average to everything in a 90-foot cone, which is straight up more damage single target than if it took its multi-attack option. And if you're able to hit the entire party with it, then it's actually quite a bit of damage. Although, it's fire damage, which is one of the most easiest types of damage to get a resistance to. And it requires a dex save, which is one of the easiest types of saving throws for a lot of classes, with some classes being able to straight up not take any damage if they succeed it. So its most devastating attack might not do much if used directly in a party of high-level adventurers. And then outside of the Fire Breath, it can't really do much. The best way to play the dragon is just to have it flying and do hit-and-run tactics, but it doesn't have flyby, so it takes attacks of opportunity if you go in for hits and aren't able to outrange them with its 10 feet of reach. And it kind of needs to stay within reach to use its legendary actions to attack. There's also the fact that this super high CR creature instantly loses to a single force cage, which it has no way to save itself from, and it's basically just stuck there for an hour until it goes away, or until you combo it with something else that kills it inside. Since the creature doesn't have a way to teleport, it only has 3 legendary actions per turn and no other special abilities. So with a properly timed and positioned Fire Breath, you could potentially take out a whole party with one attack. But it's one of the worst types of damage to try to do this with, using one of the worst types of saving throws, so there's really good chance that it's just not going to work. And at number 8, we have the Lich. Now, this might seem kind of like an odd creature to put on a list of worst high-level monsters, because the Lich is another hallmark of Dungeons & Dragons, and is usually the end boss of a whole bunch of campaigns. But the Lich has one little flaw that definitely lets it deserve a spot on this list, which I'll go over in a little bit. Now, the Lich is a CR 21 creature, and it has the potential to deal around 124 damage per round, counting legendary actions, all using maximum damage efficiency of casting 3 cantrips. And 124 damage is not half bad. That definitely beats the threshold of the Purple Worm, although this is counting its legendary actions. It can only deal around 60 to 70 damage on its own turn without them, and that's through the use of its highest damaging spells like Finger of Death or Disintegrate. Now, the Lich does have Power Word Kill available to it, which means it has the ability to instantly kill one low health party member, which is usually a healer or a squishy spellcaster in the backline. But Power Word Kill has a 60-foot range, which just happens to be the range that Counterspell requires in order to be used. So if you do want to use your one action for the turn to kill one party member, and the Lich is close enough in order to use the spell, it's going to have to cast it through a barrage of counterspells trying to stop it. Although even then, an instant kill is still not half bad. It's just not very likely to go off because of the major flaw of the Lich. You see, the Lich only has 135 health on average. The Purple Worm has 247 health as a CR 15 creature. The low health of a Vampire Warrior, who is also CR 15, even has slightly more health at 144 on average. The Lich has an absolutely abysmal health pool, and can be killed in a single round by a high-level fighter, if it just beats it on initiative and gets into melee range. And there's a good chance it will be low on initiative since it only has a +3 dex, and a high-level party will easily be able to deal 135 points of damage in a round. The Lich has got to be one of the lowest health pools of all high CR creatures, and he only has 17 AC, which he can increase to 23 but uses shield as a reaction, although it's probably better saved for a counterspell. He does also have a whole bunch of other immunities and resistances, but those are easily overcome by just not using poison damage against it, and having a magic weapon. And the spells it does have aren't that scary, to be honest. Power Word Kill sounds more scary than it actually is. If it had something like Force Cage, then it would be something to contend with. If you want to run a Lich, you might want to double its health and give it better spells to use. Kind of like what they suggest in Tomb of Annihilation, where they tell you in the module that you can swap out the final boss's spells with any other wizard spells to fit your playstyle, since they knew the Lich spells themselves are probably not that powerful, and they're best used for running away as soon as a high-level party gets to them, instead of attacking, using stuff like invisibility or a dimension door. As the module even says, the Lich's #1 tool against fighting adventurers is time, as eventually they all die of old age. And at number 7, we have the Androsphinx. This is the first creature that is below challenge rating 20 to appear on the list, only being a CR 17 creature. Now, the Androsphinx only deals 34 damage on its turn with its multi-attack, which is kind of laughably bad for a high CR creature. But it does have legendary actions, and can make a claw attack with only one of its actions, which brings its average damage up to 85 per round with those 3 extra attacks, which is a lot more respectable. This allows it to pass the Purple Worm test, dealing a little more damage than the average amount of a Purple Worm, counting all of its legendary actions. Now, the Androsphinx itself is not really made for combat. It's more of an RP creature that has a whole bunch of flavor spells that it has available to it, which is why it doesn't really have any scary spells to use. The best damaging spell it has is Flame Strike, which it can use with 3 of its legendary actions, but it's not really the best use of a 5th level spell slot, and only does as much damage as a fireball. It does, however, have the banishment spell, which is pretty powerful and can completely remove half the party from the fight if it uses it with its 6th level spell slot, assuming the average party size of 5 to 6. It does also have this unique roar feature, where it gets stronger the more times it uses it, but it needs to use its full action each turn in order to use a roar, and the roar effect only gets good on its 2nd try, where it has a chance to actually paralyze creatures, and the 3rd roar actually deals some decent damage. Although the Androsphinx would probably be dead by the time it gets to the 3rd turn in order to use its 3rd roar, it does have less health than the purple worm, at only around 200 on average, but it does still have more health than the Lich, which isn't saying much. I think part of the reason this creature isn't as strong is definitely because it's not really supposed to be used for combat very much, and it's usually used only against the really low level characters, where it would definitely live long enough in order to use all of its roars and not be that much of a threat. I think part of the reason this creature isn't as strong is definitely because it's not really supposed to be used for combat very much, or just against really low level characters, where it would definitely live long enough to use all 3 of its roars, and the reason it has low damage is so it doesn't completely wipe them out too quickly. And at number 6, we have the Vampire Warrior. This is a variant of the Vampire, which wears plate armor and wields a greatsword, and also has a higher challenge rating because of this, putting it up to 15, which is the lowest limit for the arbitrary numbers I added for this video. Now, the Vampire Warrior, assuming highest damage dealing abilities and its legendary actions, can deal about 53 damage on average, which is definitely less than the 83 of the Purple Worm. It also only has about 100 less health than the Purple Worm, and has a whole bunch of weaknesses which are basically there for lore reasons, because vampires in literature have a whole bunch of weaknesses and they definitely carried over into D&D. Although vampires do have a few good things going for them. They have the charm action, which can allow it to slowly turn the entire party to his side, as if they fail a DC 17 wisdom save, they treat the vampire as a trusted friend and willing to perform requests for the vampire in the most favorable way it can, which lasts for 24 hours, or until they succeed another saving throw and they take damage or something. So since its normal actions don't do very much damage, it's probably better off just trying to charm the party one by one, and using its legendary actions to perform its strikes and bite attacks, which have a chance to heal him for a little bit if it deals damage. It's also really good at running away thanks to its Misty Escape and the ability to shape change. Plus it heals every turn assuming it's not subjected to one of its million weaknesses. For the high CR rating the vampire has, it kind of deals really mediocre damage, has a whole bunch of weaknesses, and its best ability uses a full action and is a save or nothing type ability. And at number 5, we have the Leviathan. This is a CR 20 creature, which deals around 62 damage on average, counting all of its legendary actions, so it definitely fails the Purple Worm test of dealing less than 83 damage with a full turn of abilities. Although the damage it deals isn't really the main point of this creature, it's definitely the tidal wave action it has, where it's a huge AoE that's 250 feet long and high, 50 feet thick, and puts everyone who's caught in it underwater where they have to succeed a DC 24 athletics check in order to swim during their turn, which a lot of classes straight up can't pass. Although the tidal wave doesn't really do that much damage for being the main selling point of this creature, at only around 33 damage on average during the first turn, where it decreases every turn that the ability is up until it loses all of its water. And it can potentially only use Tidal Wave a single time per combat since it has a recharge of 6. Leviathan also has a weakness, where if it takes 50 or more cold damage in a single turn, it starts to partially freeze. Where its speed is reduced by 20, it makes all of its attacks at disadvantage, which is a pretty substantial negative debuff. Having disadvantage basically means you're not going to hit anything anymore, so you can completely render this thing worthless by just pumping a whole bunch of cold damage into it really fast. It does have a neat little ability where it can occupy the same space as someone else, and has legendary actions to move so it can keep close to things, but it also doesn't have any teleport, so it instantly loses to any kind of force cage. Although it does at least have legendary resistances, so it doesn't lose to all types of spells instantly. If it wasn't for Tidal Wave being kind of decent, I probably would have put this at a lower spot on the list, instead of only at the middle, because it has to jump through hoops that do so little damage, as it can only get one extra attack with its legendary actions. And at number 4, we have the Dragon Turtle. The Dragon Turtle is a CR 17 creature, which has more health than the Zaratan, clocking in at 341 health. Which really makes sense since, it's a big turtle. It almost seems like a huge oversight that the Zaratan has such little health for what it's supposed to be. Anyways, having a high health pool is basically the only thing the Dragon Turtle has going well for it. It's an aquatic creature, so it only has a land movement speed of 20 feet. It can at least breathe air and water, so it's not completely screwed if it's on land. It only has 40 feet of swim speed underwater, which is 3 times less than the Leviathan, and it can only deal around 58 damage on average with its multi-attack, which is definitely less than the purple worm, but not the lowest damage of all the creatures on this list. The lowest is still probably the vampire warrior, but seeing as he's a CR 15, that's kind of reasonable. Now, the Dragon Turtle does have a nice Steam Breath ability, which hits all targets in a 60-foot cone for around 53 fire damage each, and this ability requires a Constitution save instead of a Dexterity one, which is slightly better for actually hitting a full party of adventurers. Although unlike the ancient Red Dragon's Fire Breath, this one does not deal more damage single target than its multi-attack. You would have to position it to hit at least 2 or more targets to be worth using it, and it's really the only good thing it has going for it outside of its higher than normal health pool. If you want a big tank that's able to just absorb a lot of damage against a tier 3 level party, the Dragon Turtle definitely fits that niche, as you won't really have to worry about it killing any of your party members either. And at number 3, we have the Nightwalker. This is a CR 20 creature which doesn't have legendary actions or resistances, so it auto-loses to any kind of control that it's not immune to, which it is immune to a lot of them, to be fair. It only deals around 56 damage on average, which is slightly higher than the Vampire Warrior, who is 5 CR levels lower than it. Although it does have a really scary trait called Life Eater, where if it drops a character to 0 hit points, it dies and can't be revived by anything short of a wish. So I'm assuming that's why it has such low damage and stats, because being killed by this creature hurts more than pretty much all the other creatures on this list. And I assume it's this feature that gives it such a high challenge rating, because it does have an appropriate health pool for the CR rating at around 300. Its armor class is ridiculously low though at only 14, and it only does a minor amount of damage with its Annihilating Aura, which affects creatures that start their turn within 30 feet of it. Otherwise, for how little damage this creature does, it really should be a much lower CR rating. And at number 2, we have the Tarrasque. This is only one of 2 CR 30 creatures in the game, and can deal around 232 damage on average, counting its multi-attack and legendary actions. So it definitely hits the hardest out of all of the creatures on this list, and it's even softly immune to targeted spells with its Reflected Carapace, where if you just have a spell that has an attack roll or a line, you don't want to use it on a Tarrasque. It also has 3 legendary resistances and a really big beefy health pool at 675 on average. So, why is a big, tanky creature that's able to deal a whole bunch of damage in one turn on this list, and at such a high spot too? Here's the thing with the Tarrasque. You can beat the Tarrasque with a party of level 1 rangers that are each equipped with a +1 longbow, who also have a way to fly with something like a flying carpet, and a lot of patience, as the Tarrasque has no ranged abilities at all. It also loses to Force Cage, since it doesn't have a teleport, and a whole bunch of other combinations of high-level spells. But there's also that fact that a patient ranger with a flying speed can kind of take out a Tarrasque by itself, assuming they have a lot of free time, of course, since there's not much the Tarrasque can do other than try to run away or hide behind cover. So it kind of has a few glaring weaknesses that allow you to render it almost useless, despite the fact that it does have the potential to take a lot of damage and dish out a lot of damage if it's able to hit things. And at number 1, we have the Kraken. This is a CR 23 creature who's able to deal around 83 damage on average, counting its legendary actions, which allows it to barely match the purple worm in damage for a turn, despite being 8 challenge rating levels higher. This is to say it doesn't do a lot of damage, but that's because a lot of its damaging moves have a whole bunch of extra effects to them, so that's fine. Some creatures are just kind of built for doing other things besides dealing damage. It does also have the Lightning Storm ability, which it's able to spam if there's at least 3 creatures within 120 feet of it, where it does deal more damage than its other abilities since it doesn't have the multi-attack feature, as Lightning Storm allows it to target up to 3 creatures and deal around 22 lightning damage to each of them. It can also use 3 tentacle attacks with its legendary actions, and even another use of Lightning Storm using 2 of its legendary actions. It has a pretty high health pool at around 475, which is also higher than the Zaratan. It's immune to lightning damage, and it can even throw targets at its grappled, which is a neat feature that a lot of creatures that can grapple don't usually have. But there is one glaring weakness to the Kraken, besides the fact that it doesn't do a lot of damage, and that's the fact that it doesn't have legendary resistances. The Nightwalker also doesn't have legendary resistances and is also a high CR creature, but that thing is immune to basically all forms of crowd control anyway, so it kinda gets a pass on that. The Kraken is only immune to the Frightened and Paralyzed condition, so it just auto-loses to a handful of really good spells in the game, which is something that's easily prevented by just giving epic level creatures some legendary resistances. That way they're not instantly defeated by a single banishment. It of course also loses to Force Cage since it can't teleport, and a whole bunch of other crowd control spells. The Kraken is one of the few high CR creatures that doesn't have legendary resistances, and it also doesn't do a lot of damage. And it's really kind of a disappointing creature because of how iconic the Kraken is, and how it's an excellent creature to have as a final boss in an aquatic type of game. Just, if you do run the Kraken as a final boss, make sure to homebrew some legendary resistances into it, so it's not defeated by the first crowd control spell your casters throw on it. Alright, and that's the list. Do you know of any other high CR creatures that are worse than the ones on this list that I might have mentioned? Or maybe you think I got something wrong about one of the creatures and it shouldn't be on the list. If so, I'd love to hear about those as well as ideas for future videos down in the comments. And also, did you know over half the people who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel?